Doraemon, Nobita's Little Star Wars, the sixth Doraemon feature film, much like the second film, Nobita's Space Blazers, is a space opera epic, one of the more enjoyable and visually imaginative of these Doraemon features thus far. I considered perhaps Space Blazers my favourite of them thus far, and this is handily competing with it. Very enjoyable, invigorating, with some homages visually and narratively to Return of the Jedi, most notably in its villainous character who seems to resemble Ian McDiarmid's classic Emperor. I'm going to read out aloud now, just because you could read this article yourself. It's very, very interesting, although perhaps you'd prefer to just sit back, relax, and hear me describe it, read aloud here. Japanese science fiction. I wanted to touch upon the history of science fiction anime, because science fiction is so formative to anime as a medium, given that the pioneering anime is, of course, Osamu Tezuka's Astro Boy. It was also the pioneering manga, also penned by the legendary, one of the most talented and influential individuals of the 20th century, Osamu Tezuka. Let's read this article out here. Why not? Science fiction is an important genre of modern Japanese literature that has strongly influenced aspects of contemporary Japanese pop culture, including anime, manga, video games, tokusatsu, and cinema. Both Japan's history of technology and mythology play a role in the development of its science fiction. Some early Japanese literature, for example, contain elements of proto-science fiction. The early Japanese tale of Urashima Taro involves travelling forwards in time to a distant future and was first described in the Nihongi 720 AD. It was about a young fisherman named Urashima Taro who visits an undersea palace and stays there for 3 days. After returning home to his village, he finds himself 300 years in the future, where he is long forgotten, his house is in ruins, and his family long dead. The 10th century Japanese narrative, The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, may also be considered proto-science fiction. The protagonist of this story, Kaguya Hime, is a princess from the moon who is sent to Earth from safety during a celestial war and is found and raised by a bamboo cutter in Japan. She is later taken back to the moon by her real extraterrestrial family. A manuscript illustration depicts a round flying machine similar to a flying saucer. Science fiction in the standard modern sense began with the Meiji Restoration and the importation of Western ideas. The first science fiction of any influence to be translated into Japanese were the novels of Jules Verne. The translation of Around the World in 80 Days was published in 1878 to 1880, followed by his other works with immense popularity. The word Kagaku Shosetsu was coined as a translation of scientific novel as early as 1886. Shunro Oshikawa is generally considered as the ancestor of Japanese science fiction. His debut work was Kaitei Gunkan, Undersea Warship, published in 1900, described submarines and predicted a coming Russo-Japanese war. That's fascinating. During the period between the World Wars, Japanese science fiction was more influenced by American science fiction. A popular writer of the era was Jusa Uno, sometimes called the father of Japanese science fiction. The literary standards of this era and the previous tended to be low. Prior to World War II, Japanese rarely, if ever, saw science fiction as worthwhile literature. Instead, it was considered a form of trivial literature for children. A character considered to be the first full-fledged superhero is the Japanese Kamishibai character Ogon Bat, who debuted in 1930, 8 years before Superman. Another similar Japanese Kamishibai superhero was Prince of Gamma, who debuted in the early 1930s, also years before Superman. Wow, I was not aware of this, to be honest, actually. Manga artist Osamu Tezuka, aforementioned, who debuted in 1946, was a major influence on the later science fiction authors. Lost World 1948, Metropolis 1949, and Next World 1951 are known as Tezuka's early SF trilogy. Avant-garde author Kobo Abe wrote works that are within science fiction genre, and he later had close relationship with science fiction authors. His Inter Ice Age 4, 1958 to 1959, is considered the first Japanese full-length science fiction novel. The era of modern Japanese science fiction began with the influence of paperbacks that the US occupation army brought to Japan after World War II. The first science fiction magazine in Japan, Seiyun, was created in 1954 but was discontinued after only one issue. Several short-lived magazines followed Seiyun in the Japanese market, but none experienced great success. Science fiction in Japan gained popularity in the early 1960s. Both the Hayakawa's SF magazine since 1959 and the science fiction coterie magazine Uchujin 1957 to 2013 began publication in this decade. The first Japan SF convention was held in 1962. Writers Association, Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of Japan, SFWJ, was formed in 1963 with 11 members. Notable authors like Sakyo Komatsu, Yasutaka Sui, excuse me for that butchered pronunciation, Taku Mayumura, Ryo Hanmura, and Aratsune Toyota debuted at the Hayakawa SF contest 1961 to 1992, restarted since 2012. Other notable authors such as Shinichi Hoshi, Ryu Mitsuse, Kazumasa Hirai, Aran Kiyodomari, and Yoshio Aramaki were also published. They were influenced by the West. Their work was distinctively Japanese. For example, Kazumasa Hirai, Aratsune Toyota, and Takumi Shibano wrote novels as well as plots for SF anime and SF manga, which are some of the most prominent examples of Japanese contributions to the genre of science fiction. The contributions of excellent translators such as Tetsu Yano, Masahiro Noda, Hisashi Asakura, and Norio Ito introduced English science fiction to readers in Japan and greatly influenced public opinion of science fiction. SF Magazine's first editor, Masami Fukushima, was also an excellent novelist and translator. In visual media genre, film studio Toho spawned the kaiju film genre in 1954 with Godzilla. Eiji Tsuburaya, who directed the special effects for Toho's film, formed his own studio and created Ultraman in 1966. Tezuka's manga Astro Boy, 1952 to 1968, became the first Japanese TV animation series in 1963. Public interest in science fiction had risen notably in Japan by Expo 70. Komatsu's Nihon Shinbotsu, aka Japan Sinks, 1973, was a bestseller. Uchu Sankan Yamato, aka Space Battleship Yamato, was a work of anime placed in a science fiction setting, was aired, and Star Wars was screened in Japan in the late 1970s. The change in the nature of the science fiction genre in Japan that resulted from these events is often called infiltration and diffusion, Shinto to Kakusan. At this time, Hanmura's Denki SF, literally mythology-based SF series, and Hirai's Wolf Guy series became prototypes of later Japanese light novels through the works of Hideyuki Kikuchi, Baku Yumamakura, and Haruka Takachiho. In addition, new science fiction magazines such as Kiso Tengai, SF Adventure, and SF Hoseki were founded. A number of notable authors debuted in either SF Magazine or one of these new publications. Akira Hori, Junya Yokota, Koji Tanaka, Masaki Yamada, Musashi Kanbei, Asuza Noa, Shohei Kanbayashi, Koshu Tani, Mariko Ohara, Kohira, Hitoshi Kusakami, Motoko Arai, Baku Yumakura, Yoshiki Tanaka, and Hirosuga. In the 1980s, the audio-visual side of the Japanese science fiction genre continued to develop. Hayao Miyazaki's Kaze no Tani no Nausicaa, aka Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, and Mamoru Oshii's Urusei Yatsura 2, Beautiful Dreamer, were first screened. On TV, real robot anime series starting with Mobile Suit Gundam were aired, and the science fiction artist group Studio New joined the staff of the Super Dimension Fortress Macross. I've never actually watched Macross myself yet. Animators Hideaki Anno, Yoshiyuki Sadamoto, Takami Akai, and Shinji Higuchi, who had attracted attention by creating anime that had been exhibited at Daikon 3 and Daikon 4, established Studio Gainax. Literary science fiction magazines started to disappear in the late 1980s when public attention increasingly switched to audio-visual media. The Hayakawa Science Fiction Contest was also discontinued, removing a major outlet for the work of many writers. A number of science fiction and space opera writers, including Hosuke Nojiri, Hiroshi Yamamoto, Ryuji Kasamin, and Yuichi Sakamoto, began writing light novel genre paperback science fiction and fantasy novels, which are primarily marketed to teenagers. This period, during which literary science fiction declined, has been labeled the Wintry Age. In the mainstream of science fiction, Yoshiki Tanaka published Ginga Ayu Densetsu, aka Legend of the Galactic Heroes series. That's an amazing piece. That anime is magnificent. I've said that before on this channel. Anyway, the boundary between science fiction novels and light novels was blurred in the 1990s. Although Hiroyuki Morioka's Saikei no Monsho series is considered to be in the vein of the light novels, the series was published by Hayakawa Shobo as part of the mainstream science fiction world. On the other hand, light novel writers like Sakamoto and Nojiri have also published hard sci-fi novels. As a continuation of infiltration and diffusion of science fiction into mainstream literature, Kinzaburo Oh, who later received Nobel Prize in Literature, wrote 2 science fiction novels in 1990 to 1991. Haruki Murakami received World Fantasy Award for Kafka on the Shore in 2006, and his 2009 novel 1Q84 was a bestseller. Meanwhile, in the visual fields, the new Gamera series, 1995, 1996, 1999, directed by Shusuke Kaneko with visual effects by Shinji Higuchi, renewed the kaiju genre film. Those are magnificent. We have videos on 1 and 2, not free yet, that'll have to arrive at some stage. An anime television series, Neon Genesis Evangelion, 1995 to 1996, directed by Hideaki Anno, got phenomenal popularity. Now, Evangelion, I'm not as big a fan of the show. I like the film, End of Evangelion, where everyone dies. That's a glorious piece of work. No, really, it's a mega masterpiece, I might say. Although Yoshiki Tomino's The Space Runner Edeon film duology, it's a great series, but the film duology, A Contact and Be Invoked, the whole ending sequence of Be Invoked from 1982 might be was the inspiration for, I believe, many people believe, and is probably a superior realization of that idea than even End of Evangelion. Anyway, the 2000s decade saw a recovery in the market for literary sci-fi. Science fiction books had solid sales compared to the overall decline of the publishing industry. SFWJ and Tokuma Shoten began the Japan SF Budding Writer Award contest in 1999, and Tokuma launched the quarterly magazine SF Japan in 2000, ceased in 2011. Hayakawa started a new label, J Collection, in 2002. Kadokawa Haruki Corporation conducted Komatsu Sakya Award contest in 2000, ceased in 2009. A New Year's Best Anthology series edited by Nozomi Omori and Sanzo Kusaka started in 2008 by Tokyo Sogensha, ceased in 2019. And From It, the Sogen SF Short Story Prize contest spun off in 2010. This is mostly literary. I was hoping this would be more about the visual mediums because I was really interested in, again, like a history of sci-fi and anime, but this is a lot more generalized and speaks mainly about literature here. I may end it here. I hope you enjoyed this sped up Doraemon's Nobita's Little Star Wars. Thanks again, my good and dear friends. Appreciate it immensely.